Chapter 64, A Song of Remnants of Love in the Red Dust. After a short period of silence, the camp leader looked at Xu Qing and suddenly spoke. "Kid, let's forget about this matter. You've saved Captain Lei, and this person is dead. There's no need for us to continue fighting to the death. Moreover, in an elder of the Diamond Sect, if you fight to the death with me, it will be equivalent to starting a war with the Diamond Sect. My sect's ancestor is a Foundation establishment expert." Xu Qing fell silent and suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. His body staggered as he lifted his right hand, wanting to wipe it away. At this moment, the camp leader, who wanted to call a truce, suddenly had a cold glint in his eyes. His entire person rushed toward Xu Qing with a boom. His speed was so fast that golden light erupted from his entire body at this moment. He seemed to have transformed into a diamond's body. Diamond Third Art. From afar, the camp leader's entire body was suffused with golden light. His aura was shocking and his killing intent was incomparably intense. On the other hand, Xu Qing's expression didn't change at all. His original intention to stagger instantly vanished, as though everything was fake. His raised right hand wasn't wiping the blood, but he lifted it above his head. His bloodshot eyes then closed slightly. The image of the god statue that walked down like a god in the temple back then appeared in his mind. When he lifted his hand, it was peerlessly stunning, as though it contained some kind of great Tao blade. He had imitated this strike countless times, but he had never used it before. Now, he felt that he could use it. A beam of purple light erupted from his body, covering his entire body and his raised right hand. It was different from the golden color of the statue. After Xu Qing copied it, it emitted a purple aura. Under this purple light, the instant the camp leader roared and got close, Xu Qing's right hand slowly descended in a seemingly casual manner. There was nothing strange about it. It was very ordinary and simple. However, there seemed to be some extraordinary charm contained in this ordinary look. This extraordinary charm caused all the purple light to instantly gather on Xu Qing's right hand. At the instant it landed, a blurry giant saber shadow appeared above his head. This figure was huge like a heavenly saber. Purple light rose and flickered, replacing the sunlight, replacing the golden light, replacing everything. As Xu Qing's right hand moved, it suddenly slashed down. Thunder rumbled in the sky, and the ground of the campsite rumbled. The strong wind was accompanied by piercing light as it rumbled and exploded in all directions like a tie. All of the scavengers involuntarily retreated. The camp leader's speed then slowed down until he stopped 10 feet away from Xu Qing. He stared at Xu Qing in a daze and slowly lowered his head to look at the ground beneath his feet. Under his feet, a straight crack appeared on the ground. This crack was 70 to 80 feet long and it extended from under his body to his back. "This strike," the camp leader muttered. A bloody mark suddenly appeared on his forehead. This bloody mark instantly split open to his chin and then his chest. After that, fresh blood spurted out from his dantian. His body then directly split into two and fell to the ground. The surroundings were completely silent, only the sounds of hurried breathing could be heard, revealing the disbelief and horror in everyone's hearts. Under the setting sun, the afterglow scattered on the blood-stained ground, reflecting the lonely face of the youth. Drops of blood flowed down from his fingers and landed on the blood pool on the ground, creating layers of ripples. The figure in the ripples was a little blurry and couldn't be seen clearly, but the desolate intent and coldness in his eyes could be seen clearly. Xu Qing silently put away the dagger that was covered in blood and the pitch-black iron stick. After that, he took the talisman treasure with blurry words as well. He then turned and walked toward Croissant and Lu One Tooth, who were in the crowd. Croissant and Lu One Tooth had looks of awe on their faces as they watched Xu Qing walk over. They watched as he silently took the unconscious Captain Lei, who was on the verge of death, and carried him away. Hence, he lowered his head and followed him into the distance. Under the setting sun, Xu Qing's shadow was stretched very long. The fresh blood that covered the ground revealed an indescribable sadness. The scavengers in the surroundings couldn't help but look at his figure and the blood and corpses that filled the long street. Behind Xu Qing, the blood seemed to form a shocking bloody trail. Some people recalled the bloody marks Xu Qing had left behind when he dragged the giant horn python through the beast fight arena during the entrance training. Two scenes and two blood trails seemed to overlap at this moment. "Kid." It wasn't just one person, but all the scavengers who had gathered here quickly shouted, "Kid! Kid!" The voice grew louder and louder. There were old people, children, middle-aged men, and women with feathers on their heads. Their eyes slowly revealed fanaticism, and their roars gradually echoed through the sky. This was the unique salute of scavengers. At dusk, at the entrance of the campsite, Xu Qing carried Captain Lei on his back. When he arrived here, he turned his head and looked at Cross and Luan Tooth. The two of them also looked at Xu Qing. There was reverence in their eyes, but there was also a hint of complexity. They had guessed something. "Are we leaving?" Cross asked softly. "I went to send Captain Lei on his last journey, and then I will leave." Xu Qing nodded. Cross and Luan Tooth fell silent. Xu Qing felt a sense of farewell in his heart and cast a deep glance at them. After that, he shifted his gaze to the campsite that he had lived in for almost half a year. "Take care." Luan Tooth stared at Xu Qing and went forward to help him tidy his messy hair. She didn't mind the fresh blood on his body and gently hugged him. "What about you guys?" Xu Qing didn't reject Luan Tooth's hug and asked softly. "We have to leave this place as well. Don't worry. Cross and I have our hands and feet, and our strength isn't bad either. We can go to any campsite," Luan Tooth said with a smile. Cross still didn't speak, but he stepped forward and hugged Xu Qing tightly. Xu Qing took a deep breath and waved to them. He then turned and strode out of the campsite's main gate, heading in the direction of the Forbidden Zone. Behind him, under the setting sun, Cross and Luan Tooth stood there silently as they watched him leave. When Xu Qing's figure disappeared at the end of the horizon, Luan Tooth mumbled, "Cross, will we see him again in the future?" "Unfortunately, we still don't know his name." "I think so. Names aren't important," Cross said softly and grabbed Luan Tooth's hand. Xu Qing left the campsite and headed toward the Forbidden Zone. He carried Captain Lei on his back and moved forward silently, just like how he had carried Captain Lei when he was heavily injured back then. Just like how he had carried Captain Lei when they parted ways. It was the same path and the same person. However, he could sense that Captain Lei was getting lighter and lighter. The vitality in his body was also getting lesser and lesser, and the aura of death was spreading uncontrollably. The sorrow in Xu Qing's heart grew increasingly intense. He silently stepped into the jungle and walked into the Forbidden Zone. He silently headed in a certain direction and continued walking. Time slowly passed. The sun had already set and night had fallen. However, he seemed to have sensed the blood and remnant killing intent on Xu Qing's body. No mutated beasts appeared in front of him on the way, allowing Xu Qing to continue moving forward sorrowfully. 2 hours later, a weak voice rang out hoarsely from behind him. "Kid, I just had a dream." Captain Lei woke up with a dazed expression as he mumbled. He didn't ask why he was here, nor did he ask why Xu Qing appeared, nor did he tell him about his experiences. "I dreamed of Red Peach and you." Xu Qing's eyes were a little red, and the sorrow in his heart grew even denser. He sped up, but he tried his best to maintain a steady pace as he got closer and closer to his destination. "In the dream, you were still very obedient. You always got first place in school." Captain Lei wanted to laugh, but it seemed that these few sentences had exhausted more than half of his strength. His voice gradually weakened as he muttered softly before he fainted. "What a good dream. Kid, I can't hold on much longer." Xu Qing lowered his head and sped at full speed. On the way, he tried to use his purple crystal to help Captain Lei, but it was useless. It couldn't keep his life. Finally, an hour later, he arrived at the place where they had met the singing voice that day. It was still the same area and the same big tree. At that point, Xu Qing gently put Captain Lei down and supported him against a tree. His eyes were red and his nose felt sour as he looked at the wrinkled old man who was on the verge of death. "Captain Lei," Xu Qing said softly. The old man leaned against the tree and slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were cloudy as he stared blankly at the world in front of him. Only after a long time did he seem to recognize what this place was. He gradually smiled and there was a hint of light in his eyes. "Kid, do you have alcohol?" Xu Qing silently nodded and took out a flask of wine from his leather pouch. He then placed it beside the old man's mouth and fed him a large mouthful. This sip of wine caused the light in the old man's eyes to become even brighter at this moment, like the final radiance of a candle. It was at this moment that he saw Xu Qing's red eyes clearly and laughed. "Why are you crying?" Captain Lei seemed to have gained some strength. With Xu Qing's help, he struggled to sit up. Leaning against the big tree, he wanted to lift his hand to touch Xu Qing's head, but he couldn't do it. However, The moment he gave up, Xu Qing slowly placed his hand on his head. The old man laughed. "I'm still quite lucky. At the very least, at this time, I have someone to accompany me. I have wine to drink and someone to bury me after I die. And in this world, how many people died a lonely and desolate death, silently exposing their corpses in the wilderness? Death isn't scary. What's scary is that before I die, there isn't a single familiar person in front of me." At this point, the light in Captain Lei's eyes slowly dimmed. He suddenly spoke. "Kid, I want to take another sip." Xu Qing's heart was filled with sorrow. He took the flask and gently placed it beside Captain Lei's mouth. As the alcohol flowed out, Captain Lei looked behind him with a dazed expression as he mumbled, "Red Peach, are you here to pick me up?" The wine spilled on the old man's clothes and landed on the soil. He didn't drink it, but the light in his eyes was extinguished along with the fire of life. Xu Qing's body trembled as he lowered his head. He could no longer control the sorrow in his heart, and it spread out from the bottom of his heart, enveloping his entire body. He gripped the alcohol flask tightly. Even though the alcohol flask had changed shape in his hands, he didn't notice it. A long time later, Xu Qing bit his lips and silently placed the alcohol flask to the side. He then lifted his head and looked at the old man who would never wake up. He couldn't help but recall the scene in the city ruins when the other party suddenly turned his head to look at him. "Kid, are you willing to leave here with me?" Tears flowed down from the corners of Xu Qing's eyes. He removed the blood stains on his face, leaving to clear marks on his clothes. Growing up in the slums, he had stopped crying a long time ago. However, today, he couldn't hold it in. He looked at the old man's corpse until the sky turned bright again. He then silently buried the old man and the alcohol flask under a tree. Scavengers didn't need stillness because no one would offer sacrifices. But the old man had a monument. Xu Qing stared blankly at the tombstone. After a long time, he took out a ball of sackcloth from his leather pouch and took out the only piece of candy inside. He silently placed it in his mouth, leaned against the tree and closed his eyes. Sugar. Very sweet. Someone had told Xu Qing that he would feel better after eating it when he was sad.